One other piece, final piece before we break, around composition of the service team. We use a lot of recovery rhetoric in addiction treatment. What has happened to the representation of people in recovery in addiction treatment settings between 1970 and 2009? If you look at my monograph, it's gone from, actually in the late 60s, near 100% in some settings. I'm thinking about some of the early therapeutic communities, for example, of that era. The place that I was treated in 1969 had no professionals working for it at that point. 100% of the people were in recovery. Now, to be honest, though, at that period, the early rise of treatment, there was usually about a 70-30 mix. About 70% were people in recovery, about 30% were multidisciplinary professional staff. Nationally, no, was not. No. Most of the early therapeutic communities of that era were headed by ex-addicts. Phoenix House might have been the exception with Mitch Rosenthal. So my point is, through the professionalization, right, we dramatically lowered the representation of recovery people in staff roles. We also then, by attrition, lost our volunteer programs. Agreed? We lost many programs lost their alumni associations, or they may have one in name, but they're really vibrant alumni associations, where you'd have 200 and 300, 400, 500 people showing up for events. I mean, those are kind of like in a memory. They're really the exception. So I want you to think about what that meant for people going through treatment in terms of exposure to a large number of people in long-term recovery. That number has dramatically shrank over the years. And through professionalization, if we have individuals in recovery as professional addiction counselors, they may be coached within their programs. They cannot disclose that status. And if they do, it's seen as a boundary violation in their relationship with clients. I mean, that's how far we've come in 40 years in terms of that role. What you're seeing with recovery management is very interesting. How important is it, do you think, for people who are diagnosed with cancers to meet survivors of cancer? I mean, it's that same kind of thing. We're saying there are some functions that occur in terms of recovery that we desperately need people to come in and offer the living proof of those statements. So to bring people back in, we're sort of bringing in a whole new role as we push recovering people out through professionalization with all the escalating educational requirements and other things. We're bringing them now in the back door through the roles of recovery coach, recovery support specialist, outreach. Some places are still using the case manager term for people who are in recovery. We're seeing a renewed emphasis on volunteer programs. We're increasing consumer counselors, alumni associations. It's sort of like recovery representation is becoming, again, a huge issue. And at a local advocacy agency, people are coming to treatment programs and saying, how many recovering people you got on your board? How many recovering people? Do you have staff representation of people in recovery? It's almost like a disabilities rights movement. Nothing about us without us. If you're going to make decisions in this community critical to the lives of people needing and in long-term recovery, we need recovering individuals and families at that table in those policy discussions. So this is the political and cultural awakening that I talked about earlier this morning. The other thing that we're beginning to do is we're recognizing the role of indigenous healers within particularly cultural communities and their role in the long-term recovery process. In the city of Chicago, we asked the question, one of our studies, is recovery for African American women different than for their Caucasian counterparts? We had a ton of theories. We were going to prove, write it up, publish, get rich. I mean, we were hot on this. We knew what we were going to find before we did it. That's the first sign of bad research. And sometimes data is very humbling. Because when the data rolled in, at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and 12 months, we compared all these white women with all these African American women. And you know what? We didn't find diddly squat. But when we went out 15 months and 18 months, it was like they split. And they split by race. Let me tell you a key question. We asked the question, what is your primary sobriety-based support structure today? Who are the people most important to your sobriety today? And in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and 12 months, all them white women, all them black women were saying AA and NA and my recovery home. I mean, very traditional recovery support resources. The second we got beyond a year, they talked about their churches. Okay? They talked about their pastors. They talked about recovery ministries they'd found. They didn't say they didn't necessarily stop going to 12-step programs. But when they said the most important source of support for your recovery today. And we asked the question, why 12 months? I mean, if it's that important, why wasn't that it number one at 3 months? You know what they told us? It took me a year clean enough. It took me a year to feel clean enough to go back and make connection with that institution. Now, I think that's changing, by the way, now. I think the times are even getting shorter now. Because I'm describing time 80s and early 90s when the churches didn't exactly have big welcome signs out. But today they do. So I'm suspecting that's going to be earlier. Here's the point. If as in this example, we know that many African American women and men may even use different religions to do this, agreed? In one of our studies we found women migrating towards Christian churches and a number of our men moving towards Islam. Nation of Islam in particular. So my point is simply this. If we know that that women in this community, many of them will migrate towards churches and faith-based ministries to sustain their recovery over the time, who needs to be at the table with us? If we do not have those churches at the table with us, it is unconscionable. We need to be reaching out into the lives of those churches and inviting those churches into our lives to be available as a choice for support for those women. And it's not a pre-existing thing that says, I'm biased because I like that. It's simply saying, whatever that indigenous culture dictates is a pathway of recovery. In the Native American communities that I work with, do you think there are indigenous healers and healing rituals within those communities that are crucial to long-term recovery? Absolutely. And if so, how should they be involved with us as a treatment institution? We need to break down I want you to begin to think about treatment without walls. Are you with me? There's not a boundary between the treatment institution and the natural communities of those we serve. And as we think about if we're going to help this person initiate and coach them into recovery, what are the sources out there that are going to help sustain and nurture and elevate the quality of that recovery? Then we need to invite them in so we have this going on. So there's a seamless process between recovery initiation and recovery maintenance. Let's take a break. We're working too hard.